Good morning and welcome back to Real Estate Live UK. Our weeks of free to attend virtual events run 3 times a year in February, June and October. The programme is brought to you by White Label, our partners and sponsors, and we'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the organisations that have contributed to the exceptional lineup taking place this week. During the sessions this week, places across the UK have been showcasing investment opportunities, and industry-leading experts from the public and private sectors have been discussing new ideas and topical issues relating to property. You can view the full programme of sessions that have been taking place across the week and those still yet to come by visiting our website, www.realestatelive.co.uk. Several of our panels and presentations are linked to our key themes for the week: driving green investment, promoting healthy places, redefining town centres, and homegrown tourism and leisure. Right now, we have our homegrown tourism and leisure keynote as we ask, how will the increase in staycations impact places and the property sector? Just before we start, I'd just like to remind you, the audience, to please feel free to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A function. And now, I'm pleased to hand over to our chair for this session, Jo Gumb, Director at White Label. Over to you, Jo.
Hi, welcome to everybody who's just arrived and you're coming into the Zoom room, as I can see you now. Welcome to this particular session, which is focusing on staycations. I actually looked up the word staycation, so make sure I fully understood what it actually meant. And I understand there is an alternative, which is called a holistay. Now, to me, that sounds like I'm staying in a hologram suite, which might sound very nice, but it's nowhere near as nice, really, as staying in the UK, which is much more interesting. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. We have a host of experts joining us today to talk about the opportunities that come out of staycation, both in the short term and in the long term, as we try to seize the opportunities and make sure that we can generate economic growth within the current constraints so that we can have an eye to the future for even greater economic growth when the full restrictions are lifted. So we have Alan Simpson, Acting CEO of London & Partners, Bill Addy, CEO of Liverpool Bid, Stephen King, the Head of Airlines, Gatwick Airport, and Jo Stather, Director of the Hotels element of CBRE. They are all here to answer your questions. Please start putting the questions in the Q&A from now. There's nothing stopping you doing that, and we'll be able to get a little bit of a heads up on what those are once we go into the full Q&A panel session. You can also ask a question live. So if you want to raise a hand, audience, I will see you in my panel, and I will know that to bring you in to be able to put your question direct to our panelists. Given that we are still on Zoom and we're not quite live, it would be really nice if some of you did that, because it would feel much more like a real live event. So I'd really appreciate it if somebody wanted to put their hand up later and ask us all a question. In the meantime, we will get underway, and I'm going to start with Stephen, looking at Gatwick. Now, I'm just going to say very briefly that the weather here, and I'm quite close to Gatwick, isn't that good. From a staycation perspective, but for our audience out there, I've checked this out earlier, and I understand the sun is shining in Liverpool and it is shining down in Devon. So although, we may not have picked the best spot to start with, we know there are lots of places that people can go to, and then when they've been there, they can come back to Sussex to enjoy the weather down there. So Stephen, often the focus for Gatwick is abroad. Clearly, that's a bit challenging at the moment, but the industry does seem to be adapting in the sense of that EasyJet have just announced a whole load of domestic flights. So how can Gatwick continue to thrive, look to the future and support the local economy in our current staycation mode?
Morning. Yeah, you're right. Normally we fly 47 million. Well, in 2019, we flew 46.5 million passengers to over 230 destinations across the world. 9 of those destinations were domestic, and so there is still, even pre-COVID, there was obviously a fair amount of domestic travel happening. But obviously, what we've seen recently, and particularly since the 17th of May, when we've been able to, it's been sort of legal to travel again. We've seen domestic has been dominating the market. And that's also led to lots of innovation from our airlines. So as you say, EasyJet just announced a new EasyJet announced a Gatwick to Newquay flight fairly recently. They've just added more capacity into Northern Ireland, across to Belfast. And that's happening really across the UK, across airports. Lots of smaller airports are actually gaining flights, so people are able to connect from Leeds to Exeter, which and there's new airlines doing that. But I guess Gatwick has really our primary role is international travel. international passengers are what accounts for sort of 85% of our business. But that's not just people going off on holiday. That's lots of people coming into the region. That's lots of inbound tourists. That's lots of cargo coming in as well, and cargo going out. So lots of the local economy, exporters are able to export from their sort of local airport. But also, as soon as you have an airport and direct trade links and direct flight links, you get better trade links. So the local businesses tend to thrive as well. But if we go back to tourism, because that's really the theme of this, I guess we spend a lot of time working with the sort of local tourist boards and local economic partnerships within our region to make sure that we're able to promote those. And that's part of, to be honest, the pitch. My job is to go around persuading more airlines to launch more flights to Gatwick. And part of the pitch, what's important is being able to say how great West Sussex is, being able to say how eclectic and fun Brighton is. And all that sort of surrounding regions. They're really encouraging people to come and spend some time in the southeast before going on elsewhere within England or within the UK.
I'll back that. I come from down just south of Gatwick, and it's a lovely region. And anybody who's listening and was looking for a really nice holiday, South Downs, great place to go. Talking about that shift from international to national sort of brings me on to Alan, because clearly, historically, London and Partners have put an awful lot of effort into getting our international tourism business going very hard into London. So what is it that London and Partners can do now to benefit the businesses in London while we're still in this sort of, I'm going to call it, slight limbo feeling?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'll start by saying that I'm a bit more bullish about the medium term. If you look at previous epidemics around the world, demand for tourism does come back really quite swiftly. And I suspect one of the things that we're seeing now really is demand running ahead of supply. And we can talk about that a bit more later. What are we doing? Well, we've got a £7 million campaign, part funded by the Mayor of London, part funded by industry, which is focused on creating as much spend in the consumer economy in central London as we can. Polling suggests that the way of doing that is pulling people into London for overnight stays from around the country. And the polling also shows that if you live in a region of the UK outside the southeast, London, and you were looking at an international holiday, London occupies a similar emotional register, if you like, to an overseas trip, because it's big, it's different. It's a qualitatively different experience to going to Cornwall or to Devon or to the Highlands of Scotland. It feels a bit more perhaps like an international holiday. So that £7 million is being spent roughly half and half on a series of events, whether that's outdoor cinema, galleries staying open, fun things in the public realm, trying to give, if you like, a point to coming in. And then the other half is being spent on advertising. So that's television ads, radio ads, out-of-home billboards, but very much aimed at a youngish, often young family audience in the belt around London that you can bring in for a 1 or 2 night stay. Because we know that some people will come in for 2 weeks, some people will, but perhaps more people might see London as a 2, 3, 4 night stay location, as well as a trip to the South Downs or to Cornwall or whatever it is. The early feedback from that campaign is very strong, and it suggests that actually that is a winnable argument. But I think, ultimately, we've got somebody from Liverpool on the call here as well. I think what I would say is there is quite a bit of tourism to go around domestically this year. We've seen our Visit London website, and I'll just finish with this, is up 120% on domestic visits from pre-COVID. So clearly we are converting international tourists to domestic. So at least that might carry us through to things returning to normal next year.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go over to Bill now, because you're representing Liverpool here. And I know that when I was looking at Staycation a couple of months ago now, I realised that because I'd always lived down south, I didn't know as much about the rest of the UK as probably I should do. So Liverpool was on my target list of a place to visit for staycations. So do you think that Liverpool can benefit from that, from getting people who have traditionally, headed off on cheap flights to the sunshine to actually come and fully appreciate what the great cities like Liverpool have to offer? And what can the city do to support that in terms of attracting tourists?
Absolutely, Joe. So from Liverpool's perspective, the visitor economy was one of the shining stars pre-COVID. It had grown as a city region to 4.9 billion, 58,000 jobs. And prior to March 2020, it was storming ahead. We were planning a very, very good year in 2020. Clearly, like the rest of the UK, it has been impacted severely. And so we've seen, we lost £2 billion last year. And we've lost 20,000 jobs in it. So how can we recover? Well, we can recover because of the fact of the assets that we have in the city. So we have 2 world-class golf courses, the international racing at Aintree. We know that we have Premier League football clubs when they get moving, but we also have a great opportunity with the museums, art galleries, the hotels, and the whole of the city region is a great place for people to come and visit and stay. Connectivity is good. So in fact, we had a good regional airport, John Lennon Airport, that was high performing. At the moment, the biggest route is from Belfast. So we're getting a lot of traffic coming into Liverpool from Northern Ireland because that's one of the safest routes that can happen. And the other important thing is we've now put in place an advertising campaign funded by our city region, combined authority. And it's really focusing on the fact that you can come and stay in Liverpool, but you can also have space so you can get to the seaside and get to the countryside, because the research that we undertook where people were still unsure about cities. They wanted to come to cities, but they also wanted space. So we've been able to target via segmentation the groups that we believe are kind of comfort staycations. That's happening. Our footfall figures have increased. In fact, we know that there is a pent-up demand that people want to come back and come and spend time in Liverpool as a city region. So that's part of the work that we're doing at this moment in time, is about focusing on that and showing people that they can come and enjoy the time in the city, but it's a safe city to come and be. But we have such great attractions with our museums, or theatres when we can get them going. The difficulty we have at the moment for the whole of the UK is the uncertainty. And once we can get past that uncertainty and start opening up again, then I believe that the demand will come back strong. And I see the rest of this year being very strong. One of the highlights for Liverpool was the cruise industry. We were anticipating over 120 cruise liners coming in, dockings into Liverpool in 2020. We've already seen new cruise ships coming in. So MSC Virtuoso, which is a brand new ship, is embarking in Liverpool. Viking Venus, also a brand new ship that's operating. We've got Disney coming with the Disney cruise ship, and they will use Liverpool as an embarkation point. We know that those cruises are just UK passengers and they're cruising UK waters, but we're seeing this summer alone will be over 80 individual dockings of cruise ships during the period between now and the autumn. So that I believe that the demand is there. I believe that it will come back strong. But the other issues, and we'll come on and talk about it later, are issues about support for business, because the difficulty is that a lot of our businesses are struggling with debt, struggling getting staff, and struggling really just to keep going at the moment. So it's the delicate balance.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think there are a lot of businesses that would feel a little bit of Disney magic would go a long way right now. I'm going to go over to Joe now to look at what have you seen in terms of some of the trends in staycations, and what impact are you seeing on that hotel and leisure industry? Is it changing CBRE's long-term strategy in terms of what they plan for?
Thanks, Joe. So I thought I'd maybe first of all start by sharing some kind of broader tourism statistics just to kind of contextualize things. So I was looking at some of the data provided by our friends at Tourism Economics, and in 2020, the number of domestic nights in paid accommodation declined by 54%. And in comparison, the number of international nights decreased by 74%, which will come as little surprise, really, given the restrictions we've seen on international travel. In 2021, Tourism Economics then expect domestic nights to increase by 59%, so quite a strong rebound, versus just 20% for international. And then by 2025, their forecast is that domestic nights will be some 29% ahead of 2019 levels, whereas international nights will have just about recovered to where we were pre-pandemic in 2019. So clearly their school of thought, and I think ours as well, is that there has been and will continue to be a lot of domestic substitution, especially until consumers face less restrictions and have more confidence regarding foreign travel. But of course, the vast majority of that substitution will concern leisure travel. I think it's probably going to take longer for corporate and meetings and incentives to come back. And we can really see that reflected in hotel market performance across the last 12 and 18 months. So since March last year, according to the guys at Hotstats, London hotels have achieved an average occupancy of just 11.3%. The provinces have achieved an occupancy of 23.4%. And then in comparison, Blackpool's hotel market has achieved almost 40%, which actually isn't bad going considering the amount of time that hotels were forced to close for. And it really does seem to be the coastal and countryside locations that have been and continue to be in the highest demand as far as hotels are concerned. I think the pandemic has really flipped the kind of, what we would usually consider the characteristics of a resilient hotel market on their head. London's usual visitor profile, for example, which would sustain really strong hotel performance amongst the highest in the world, includes a high proportion of inbound demand from across the globe, a really diverse business mix. So it's your leisure, it's your corporate, it's your meetings, it's your events. And all of that has been thwarted by restrictions on international travel and the cancellation of a lot of those cultural events, exhibitions and conferences. In the popular leisure markets, we've seen hotels advertising at very strong rates and in many cases actually achieving them. I think there's undoubtedly a pent-up demand for travel, which is supported by enforced saving through the pandemic. And it seems that consumers are willing to pay more than they usually would for a UK break. I suppose the question remains on how sustainable that is. In response to the greater share of domestic tourism, we've actually seen a lot of hospitality operators and brands tailor their marketing strategies. Some of that's already been spoken about, and come up with some creative ways to capitalize on demand. And probably a positive characteristic of the industry is its adaptable capacity, and it's helped us get out of some sticky situations in the past. In the coming months, and as the speed and extent of recovery for different customer segments and revenue lines within hospitality businesses becomes more clear, I think from a real estate perspective, there'll be an increased focus from hospitality owners and operators on asset optimization. So what I mean by that is really kind of the alignment of product with anticipated demand in order to capitalize on market recovery. Now, clearly, industry finances have been hit hard by the pandemic, and the need to deliver maximum impact at minimal cost will be critical for a lot of owners and operators. And there's not really any one size fits all. Although one thing we are likely to see is probably more hotel bedrooms at the expense of traditional meeting rooms, for example, because transient accommodation demand is likely to trump the requirement for larger events and gatherings, at least in the short to medium term. But certainly hospitality brand evolution will continue to inform our view of what consumers are looking for. And a lot of the new hotel brand formats in particular suggest that lifestyle, flexibility and design will all have a major influence on booking decisions, regardless of the reason for travel and irrespective of the price point, actually. And those operators that can deliver on value for experience will probably yield the strongest levels of performance in the coming months and years. And I'm sure that's probably a point that translates across many of the other travel and tourism verticals. Just quickly on the investment market, and there haven't been that many large transactions since the onset of the pandemic. That said, we did see Blackstone complete their acquisition of Bourne Leisure earlier in the year, clearly with big expectations regarding the demand for staycations. And there are a lot of major funds out there with capital to deploy in the hotel and leisure space, but most of them at the moment are opportunistic by nature and actually see this as a prime window to acquire hotels that rarely come to the market in prime city centre locations, as opposed to countryside and coastal markets where you tend to find that supply is more fragmented and lot sizes are typically smaller. But I would add that what we are seeing is a number of smaller investors and owner and operators on the hotel and leisure side that really do see a consolidation opportunity and are targeting popular coastal and countryside locations for hospitality acquisitions and developments. And I think our belief is that these players are the ones that particularly the local authorities need to partner with and support in order to facilitate change and enhance their local offer in order to win over the consumer whilst they're in this staycation spotlight that we currently find on ourselves.
Thanks very much. I thought it was an interesting last point because you're talking about winning over the consumer so we get people to go places. So it brings me a little bit on to a topic that's actually been quite live before the pandemic, which was an awful lot of local authorities and regions in the UK were looking to promote themselves, to improve themselves, I suppose, with a sort of degree of urban regeneration in order to become more appealing, not just to businesses relocating, but also to the people who lived and worked there for a sort of better quality of life and economic message simultaneously. It feels to me, from what I do in the market, that is starting to return. And clearly it's going to be increasingly important that whatever you guys do now to get people to the local regions will also work going forward. I'm going to go over to Bill, because I know that urban regeneration is a big deal. And what is Liverpool doing in the sense of trying to make sure that it plans both for now and for when restrictions are lifted, so it can get those UK people to keep coming back in future years, and also try to get some of those bigger international clients back as well?
Well, as we were discussing earlier, Liverpool is undergoing some transformative roadworks at the moment called the Liverpool City Centre Connectivity Scheme, which is aimed to improve traffic flow across the city. One of the things that we in the visitor economy have been talking to our city council about, and trying to make sure that program is enhanced so we can actually start when traffic comes back in, foot traffic, that we can move around. But in all seriousness, Liverpool has transformed because of from 2008, when we were the European capital of culture. Culture and tourism has been a major part of the city's DNA. And what we need to do about that is put in place the structures that will allow us to support the businesses, to encourage new businesses to come. So during the pandemic, we have seen new operators coming into the city. So we have Inside by Melia, who are opening a new 220-bed hotel in the commercial core of the city. We have new restaurants that are opening because people see that Liverpool is a place that actually you can invest and you can make money from it, but clearly you can also struggle with it as well at this moment in time. But I think it's about being very intentional about how you support the business. So we're looking now at a business subvention and conferencing fund and a destination marketing fund, which at the moment we have that because, as you will know, if you've been into Liverpool, we've invested as a city in an arena and convention centre and exhibition centre in a major campus on our waterfront. And we are attracting international conferences, and we're working hard now to make sure that we have the resources in place to continue to attract those moving forward. And then we're looking at how we can transform the funding of what's required in destination marketing and subvention into making that more sustainable. In Liverpool, we have 2 business improvement districts. One of those business improvement districts was just renewed last week. And part of the renewal pledges of that are to have money for destination marketing and for subvention, because we know that public sector finance is not available in the way that it has been in the past and won't be available in the future. Purse strings will be tightened once we're through the pandemic. We saw that this week, didn't we, with Boris's announcement on Monday night, when he was asked the question about finance, and he fudged that response and said effectively, well, we've done all we can with finance. We're going to be open from the 19th of July and you'll just have to get on with it. And clearly that's not the response that we in the industry in the UK require.
Yeah, I do take your point, and that gives me a nice lead in to talk to Alan actually about what London are doing. And also I'm going to sort of link the two up here, because from a personal perspective, what draws me either to London for a couple of nights or to Liverpool or to Manchester or anywhere else are the art galleries, are the theatres, and the many venues that have been probably the most impacted now by that extension of lockdown. And what can be done in order to manage that so that they can survive until we can all go back to enjoying some of those key attractions. Yeah. Alan, over to you, because I'm aware the West End has been a bit of a hot topic recently. Thanks.
It has, but I don't want to start with the West End. I want to start with a comment on what we mean by regeneration in terms of attracting tourists in. Regeneration which attracts tourists can't look like architectural drawings. Nobody wants to go on holiday to that. You think about the places where, you go on holiday and you feel like you're living like a local. They're slightly rough, they're slightly scratchy, but they're real. So, one of the things I adore about Liverpool, for example, is how it really feels like the people of Liverpool have regenerated Liverpool. It hasn't been done top down, and I think that's quite brilliantly done. And it really does matter. I don't know if anybody on the call knows Folkestone well, but of course, there's been a lot of money invested in the regeneration of Folkestone Harbour, but they very cleverly done it in a way which facilitates local innovation, creativity, and realness, and that's fundamental, for example, to the way that we promote London. Yes, of course, we have photos of Big Ben and the London Eye, but actually just as much we have photos of Peckham. And that difference is material. I think in terms of the West End, look, ultimately, we just need to bring as many people into London in the short term as we can who are likely to go to West End shows. So that means ABC 1 and 2 overnight stays. They have to stay overnight, otherwise they're not going to go to a show from outside of London. Yeah. There is an element of that which is a bit zero sum, of course. If somebody's in London for 2 nights, they're not in Liverpool for 2 nights. But back to this point I started with at the beginning about what is the nature of the challenge here. I'd like to challenge very quickly some of the polling around return. If you poll somebody today on when they think they're going to come back to visit, the answer you get tells you how nervous they are today. It does not tell you how they'll be feeling in 2 years' time. My background's in finance, and I'll tell you that if you ask somebody what they think of how much likelihood there is of them buying a share in 2 years, they're really telling you what they think about it today, right? So the history of pandemics is people will recover very quickly. The danger is that supply can't meet the demand. So if in the short term we see sufficient scarring that restaurants, theatres, bars close down or their capacity shrinks, then we won't be able to meet the demand. But it's quite clear to me, because the polling is there, that the demand is currently running ahead of our ability to supply it.
I was just writing that down because I think it's a very good point about how we can start the planning now in order to ensure that we can meet that demand without putting further strain on what is already quite a stretched, I'm going to say more of an SME area, they're the most stretched in terms of just survival so that they can open up again. I'm going to go to Joe because you were doing a lot of the stats earlier. Do you agree with Alan on that point about if you're doing polls and stats now, it doesn't necessarily reflect what's going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I mean, I think we're very optimistic about people wanting to travel again, get back out. There's a lot of pent-up demand. I think we can take a lot of comfort from actually what we saw last year when lockdown measures were eased, albeit for a relatively short time over summer, but we saw a really significant spike in people taking breaks, all over the UK, even trying to get abroad in some circumstances. And I think that really, as I say, should give us a lot of comfort that when people are allowed to travel, they will do. Sometimes even regardless of the risks that are presented that can be quite major. The piece around getting people back into London, I think, is absolutely valid, and getting people in for the 1, 2, 3 night stays, couldn't agree more. The challenge that we have in markets like London is that we have a lot of hotels of different tiers of the market and that appeal to people at different price points. And, London is a market that appeals to a lot of international demand, particularly the 5-star properties. We know that those luxury hotels have a very high operational gearing, so they've got a lot of staff, they put on a lot of service, which means that their base level of cost and overhead is incredibly high. And in order to satisfy that, I think we really are reliant in those hotels on getting kind of a lot of that Middle Eastern demand, that North American demand from the Far East, people that will pay very, very high rates that sustain the performance and the profitability of those hotels. And until we start getting that demand back, a lot of those operations are going to remain unviable. And you will probably see a lot of those hotels actually remain closed, because in the long term, it can be more damaging to try and appeal to a domestic audience that are maybe more rate sensitive by reducing your pricing, because it's going to take years to ever get that pricing back. So that's inevitably one of the challenges that we face. I'd be keen to get Alan's thoughts on that. But I do agree. I think, in general, tourism demand is resilient. I think prior to the pandemic, there was a huge story around people spending more of their discretionary income on travel and experiences and less on the tangibles. That's not going to go away. In fact, I think the whole pandemic will actually accelerate that trend. So, I do think 2, 3, 4 years time, the industry will be in rude health and possibly even in a better state than it was before, because of all the innovation that will be forced upon us throughout these pretty challenging times.
Thanks very much. That does lead me. I'm going to go back actually to Bill and Alan very, very simply on that question, because actually I think it does reflect the point you've made about the price point for hotels and conferences and so on and so forth, is that very much is dependent on what I'm going to call that business market. And also I'm aware that Gatwick has also had historically a large number of business travellers. So as we move into what is now known as a hybrid working, I think, and that will probably continue even after restrictions are lifted, because so many companies have seen the value of the savings that they have made by using Zoom over actually meeting face to face, which is a drawback in some regards and a benefit in others. But I think hybrid is going to continue. So how can our industries readjust to what will be a change, I think, in the market? I mean, London and indeed Liverpool has obviously benefited a lot with those small suppliers able to function as for the commercial business travellers. Alan, starting with you there.
Yeah, and I think all of those points on the different price points in the market are very, very well made. On your point about hybrid working, I'll start with this. Yeah. Hybrid working sucks. It's terrible. My broadband, I'm aware, is kind of cracking out every now and again, right? It's bad. It's awful. It's not that it's better. It's cheaper. Yeah. It's not better. I think what will come, there's a slightly different dynamic, which I think will drive hybrid working a bit more, though, which is ESG. In my old life in a corporate, I would certainly have expected in the aftermath of this to start getting pressure from NGOs to not do business travel to anything like the same degree. Yeah. So, for instance, I've challenged my econometrics team to find a way of measuring spend per unit of carbon. So, for our conferences business, for example, for our conventions bureau, can we see a way of measuring the economic impact divided by the environmental impact? And that might drive towards, for example, having more regional or sub-regional conferences, in a hub and spoke model, as opposed to people flying from China to the UK for an event. But my guess is that that's going to be driven as much by ESG as it is by cost, and possibly actually in the long run more by ESG than cost. But hybrid is not good. It's just what it is. It felt novel at the beginning. Now I think we've all had thoroughly enough of it.
I don't like complete lockdown. I actually don't mind hybrid. Hybrid for me has worked because I am actually more productive rather than traveling on a regular basis to see my clients the other side of the country. I can actually, chat to them really regularly. Just call them up for a 5 or 10 minute chat. So that bit for me is a benefit. But
that's not hybrid. That's not hybrid. That's virtual.
That's virtual. But I think where you have hybrids, you can do both, which I think is very important. You can do a bit of both, whereas we have been stuck with entirely virtual. And I think entirely virtual is bad, but there will be an impact, absolutely, on business travel, either short or long term, because people have discovered that it is possible to do some business by virtual, and because of that pressure on cost. Bill, I quite liked Alan's point about Spoke and Hub, actually, which is like, that seems to be something that Liverpool could almost benefit from. In a sense, if it could make itself one of those hubs.
I was just about to say that, one of those hubs, so that people would radiate towards us. It's interesting. I think if we talk about how people will move forward in terms of how we'll operate as businesses, I think the idea of jumping on an Avanti West Coast down to London for a 2-hour meeting is probably less attractive now, which is what I was doing beforehand. When you've got people coming from around the UK, I chair the BID Foundation in the UK, which brings together business improvement districts from Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and we would come to London for a council meeting. That won't happen again, so that will change. But I think once we are able to get to meet together again, it will happen very quickly. I was part of the piloted business event that we did just back in April at the convention centre, where we had, as part of the Good Business Festival, we had a pilot event in the afternoon. And it was interesting to see that once you got through the screening, once you'd shown your negative test results, and you got inside the bubble, so to speak, when you could actually shake hands with people and hug people and kiss people and talk to people and have a glass of wine, it was amazing how quickly the barriers dropped and we got back to the way that we work, because we're human beings, aren't we? We need physical contact. We need to be able to see each other face to face. We need to be able to kick the tires, as they say in business. You need to be able to see what it is, who it is you're talking to, who it is you're buying from. And I think we will resume that physicality very quickly. And that, I'm very keen that from Liverpool's point of view as a destination, yeah, we're fine. We can travel. People will come into the city. The football clubs will be able to get people back into the stands. Thankfully, I mean, I'm an Evertonian, but thankfully Liverpool got into the Champions League. And so we have European travel coming back and some. But we need to get business tourism as well. We need to get people back in the weeks, because from an investment point of view, from a hotel income point of view, it's the business tourism that in the midweek periods when it's quiet that actually pays the rates and pays the right RevPAR for hotels, and that's the key to it. But I think it will come back, and I think it will come back strong.
Thank you, Stephen. What about you? Do you think there's going to be a shift in the kind of travellers that Gatwick sees coming through it?
I think all the points that have been made are really spot on. I think the frustrations that we're all expressing are there as well. Yeah, that 2-hour meeting, that 2-hour council meeting, we'll probably do by video, but we will certainly want to be meeting those people face to face pretty soon. And there's that sort of urge, I guess, by having spoken to people probably more regularly on video and built up a good relationship there. But the only way you can sort of make a really strong foundation is by that face to face. And so a certain amount of business travel will drop away. The short trips, the more internal trips. But I think hybrid working, for example, also does give an opportunity as well. If you're working 2 or 3 days a week in the office, that means that maybe a weekend break that at the moment doesn't feel very comfortable could turn into a 4 or 5 day break, because it can be 2 days of the weekend and then a couple of days of working from, let's say, Liverpool. But I'd also like to say working from Barcelona or working from Madrid as well. But adding into that weekend, and that also, which again hopefully eases out some of those peaks as well, which is I think a challenge that has been raised there as well. And one point I'd also come back to is that pent up demand. I think if you look at other markets around the world that have opened up, for example, the US, where you can pretty much travel domestically, relatively unencumbered. It's enormous. The CEO of Jet2 was saying that they've got more capacity on sale this summer than they've ever had previously, and that's because their main markets are open markets. And I think we're sort of starting to see that in the UK as it picks up. We're seeing that a lot in mainland Europe, where lots of the borders have come down and people are actually going, yes, I want to travel, and they're spending this money that's been saved. So for me, there's lots of evidence around the world that there is that pent up demand, and as soon as the restrictions ease and travel is possible without £300 of tests, people will start doing that, and people are already starting to do that domestically. I think, as we've all sort of expressed from our personal plans as well.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's an interesting that commercial dynamic between needing some of that higher value business in order to be able to sustain businesses, because that midweek business traveller was paying the rates that helped slightly cheaper rates at the other times of year. Although I did note from Joe's statistics earlier that people were now prepared to pay a bit more. So maybe we can get a bit of balance there, so we can make it equally economically viable for those businesses to retain custom for a longer period of time through the week. I have slightly private sector orientation to this panel. So what I was actually going to do is, given the impact that there has been, I was going around each of you in turn in a minute, and I'm going to say, what is your big ask? So in terms of, if you are looking to the future to support, grow, regenerate, find a way to meet that future demand, what is your big ask in terms of what you think you need from the authorities in order to be able to deliver on that? I know that there's no money, but is there anything else that you can think of that would provide that? And in the meantime, while you're just thinking about that question, yeah, heads up on that one. I'm just going to ask a question that came in, which is like, what makes an exceptional tourism offer? So what is that? I'm a marketing person, so it wasn't from me though. What is the thing that most attracts people to come to a place? That one top tip. Bill, I'm going to start with you because I prepare, you know what the top thing is that gets people to Liverpool. Albeit it may be football, but just bear in mind that I won't go for football, but I will go for an art gallery. So what is the top thing that draws them up there? That mix.
I think the top tip is customer service, isn't it? So when somebody comes here, they are blown away. And that's what any destination needs to do. They need to think about all the elements. So if you're a tourism organization in a town or a city, you need to think about all the elements, the welcome, the service, the quality of accommodation and the quality of offer. And that's not just one thing, because it really has to be a holistic approach to a destination, and it needs to get all parts of the destination working together so that when people come, they go away thinking, I want to go back and I want to go back for more.
I mean, it is that importance of retaining your good customers, isn't it? So they come back, because it's easier to keep the good ones than it is to keep
exactly right. And they go back and they put it on Instagram, don't they? They tell all their friends where they've been, because people love putting shots of the meals they've had, shots of the views that they've seen, because they want their friends to see it. And then their friends think, well, I want to go and experience that as well. So that's the most important thing.
Yeah, that wonderful way you can share a good experience and other people then want to join in. And what about you? What do you think is the pull? I think the customer service one was actually a very good point.
Yeah, it is. I also, the point about sort of, Instagrammable experiences. Look, people come to London, they go and point at Big Ben, right? But then they want to go and kind of have a London experience. So they want to go to Shoreditch or to Peckham, and they want to go to the cool restaurant. In the same way that now when people go to New York, yes, they want to go and see the Empire State, but they also want to go to Brooklyn. And I think cities like Liverpool, like Glasgow, like Berlin, like London, who can offer both iconic, but and also what we tend to call frontiers, are places which will win in the modern does it pass the Instagram test world. It's not enough anymore to have Big Ben. It's not enough to have the Liver building. You've also got to have really cool pop-ups, art galleries, which are more interesting than just a photo you could see on Google. It's got to be more experiential, and that's how you drive modern tourism.
Okay, Joe, do you agree with that one? Because I know this is it work the same in your world?
Absolutely agree with both of the points that have been made there. I think it's all about experience. Aligning with kind of lifestyle, I think, is key. I mentioned it before, but if you look at how all of the hotel brands are evolving now, it's all around authenticity. It's about provenance. It's about local sense of place. All of that is absolutely critical. And I think that the point that Bill made around customer service is absolutely spot on. We know that there are so many businesses out there that have been, squeezed incredibly, and that working capital is very, very tight. So investing in product is going to be a challenge. But, we all know that really good customer service can sometimes make up for a slightly tired product. So I think if operators can get staffing right and make sure that kind of warmth of welcome is there and the sense of arrival, then, I think that can kind of make up for a lot of the other issues that operators and owners might face over the next few months.
Thank you very much. I have a question that's come in from the audience here from Phil Ellis, and it's especially for you, Stephen, which is a very specific question, which is, what are the current inbound traffic level arrivals per month compared to base case? And I'm guessing that it's going to be a little bit down a bit, But where are you expecting it to get back to as well? Because I'd like to think that we are going to get back from the current dip.
Obviously, normally we'd have millions of passengers going through the airport every month. Now we have thousands of passengers going through the airport every day, and it ebbs and flows. I think what's really interesting though is to see, and it's a slightly more international slant, when Portugal went on the green list, We had over 100 flights added to the schedule by all the different operators pretty much overnight. Load factors jumped right up. There was obviously a lot of demand. If you look at Skyscanner, have data where you can just see how there's this huge mountain peak of demand as soon as the Prime Minister, or as soon as the Secretary of Grant Shapps said that Portugal was on the green list. A whole load of demand. People really did want to travel. And looking out of the window and seeing lots of rain happening here down on the south coast, I can see why there's some attraction there. But I think that comes back to that pent up demand. I think we'll probably see that a bit more peaky for the coming year or two, where maybe the weekend breaks, there'll be fewer of them. People will maybe go away a little less at the weekend, and people come in a little less for sort of November weekend breaks. But the bigger holidays, the longer trips certainly stand. And I think that question about tourism also links and what attracts people. It's people are coming into the UK not just to see Big Ben, even not just to see Big Ben and have go out and be trendy in Shoreditch, but to have a combination of that as well as a walk on the South Downs, as well as great views from the Lake District. We need to offer sort of this variety, so you can have part of the city, part of the beach, part of the countryside. And I think the UK probably does have that, and has that to be able to attract a wide variety of people who want to do all those things in a holiday.
Yeah, I agree that the UK does have such a broad range of experience. On the subject of experience, I have a lovely question from Andrew Peterson. And he says, what is real estate's involvement in developing an experience that can attract tourists? And he's given the example of an artificial ski resort in London. But I guess we could have an artificial ski resort anywhere. Bill, would you like to answer this one?
Well, I was just going to say, how many people went to Bilbao before Frank Gehry's Guggenheim was installed? Bilbao was a nice northern city, but very industrial, with some good food. You put Guggenheim there and people go and see it. And so real estate has a major role to play in delivering product. Here in Liverpool, I talked about the Arena Convention Centre and the Exhibition Centre. They're big buildings, infrastructure investment. We're about to see my football club start a stadium. In fact, they've started on site now. It's £600 million worth of brand new stadium on the waterfront. People will start to think of Liverpool in a different way. And that's about physical investment. You need the physical offer, and that's the real estate's role in that. And of course, real estate delivers the hotels. We need investment in that. We've seen that in Liverpool since 2008. We've increased from 2,000 beds to over 9,500, with another 2,500 in the pipeline. And without that infrastructure, then you can't have a modern tourist economy.
Thank you. Well, Joe, you are our key real estate representative here. So, investment in experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, agree with everything that Bill said. Similarly, look at what the Turner Contemporary's done for Margate. Look at what's happened up in Dundee. Some fantastic case studies. I would also say that, looking at hotels specifically, there are so many markets where, it looks like occupancy levels are relatively low, rates are depressed. You would never build a new hotel there, but somebody takes a chance, delivers one, and the performance absolutely flies. So it just shows that there's a lot of circumstances out there in UK markets where actually people don't stay there because they're unsatisfied with the existing hotel provision. It's not always a case of build it and they will come, but in many circumstances, we have actually seen that happen. And of course, we look at, we're working on a number of projects at the moment across UK towns and cities where there's a real urban regeneration focus, largely because of the over-expansion of the retail sector, which has now come through more challenging times. And it's all around experience to get people back into town and city centres. Be that restaurants, multimedia centres, hotels, a whole kind of range, that even the whole experiential kind of socialising now. So your put shacks of the world, indoor markets. We've seen it work incredibly well in Altrincham, and now it's been redeveloped or rolled out across a number of other towns and cities, because people love that kind of a bit of nostalgia from what was there before, but now brought back up to speed with what it can be, with some really cool local F&B providers, pop-ups, coming back to what Alan said before. So I think real estate can play a huge role in terms of the development of tourism. Absolutely critical.
Alan, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, and I'll give you a practical example. We're currently, when we're not doing tourism promotion, we also do inbound investment into London. We've got offices around the world and we find companies and bring them to London. And we're working with landlords of existing and future buildings to curate a new offer in London. So, finding from our Chinese team what the cool thing happening in China is, or in India, or in America, away maybe from LA and New York. And my experience of this generation of real estate leaders is that they are incredibly nimble, incredibly thoughtful, and are thinking about the end user experience, because there's a realization that, yes, of course, you can put a Boots or a Superdrug in and it gives you a guaranteed rent for 10 years. But if you can put in something iconic, which may be really odd, like in London, there's this Asian fast food restaurant called Jollibee who just arrived. I don't know if they're anybody else's city, but they sell fried chicken and spaghetti. This is a thing. Anyway, the queues round the block are for hours. When they first opened on the King's Road in Chelsea, it caused chaos. It caused utter chaos. You had to queue for about a day to get in. It was people sleeping overnight. It's mad. Anyway, but that drives footfall to other venues on the street, right? So there's this realization that by being creative and curational in the way that we think about the ground floor use of a building, you can increase rents above. And I'm personally incredibly impressed by the work that CBRE and others are doing to be much more thoughtful about the way we fill our public realm and actually use the public realm outside than perhaps was the case 20 or 30 years ago, in the same way that councils are.
Well, thank you very much. I think that leads me on to that question that I gave you a bit of heads up on earlier, which is what is the big ask? So if we've established that actually that big driver is going to be the experience, that one of the ways of achieving that is going to be that investment in that iconic item, that latest trend, that we're going to need that real estate market to deliver that. What is the big ask that each of you have, probably of the private and the public sector, that can help us make that leap so that experience is there to meet the demand when it exists? And I'm going to start with Stephen. What's your big ask at the moment in order to be able to get that experience right, so that people start to use Gatwick as a first choice of a place to be as a destination?
I think if I can be optimistic and positive and jump forward a couple of years, I think we've all agreed there will be recovery, and actually we've even talked about bouncing back stronger. And so it's about capacity. It's about permission to grow. We have you can just see it behind me. We have a main runway, and we also have a northern runway that's for standbys and for when the main runway is in maintenance. In 2019, we talked about bringing that into routine use. 66% of our local community said they really supported that. That's a project that we will be bringing back. Or we would do want to be able to bring back. That adds a lot of capacity to the local area. That adds a lot of capacity into London to allow more people to come in, to allow people to flow through an airport much faster, to have more efficient use of those aircraft. So I think it's that sort of permission to grow would be my ask. Okay,
I've got permission to grow. Bill, what's your big ask?
My big ask is one of continuing support. So government need to ensure, I mentioned it before, and we talked about the demand is going to be there. My concern is that because of impact on a whole range of the various drivers for the industry, that we won't be able to satisfy that demand. And so we need government to step up and actually realise that they need to continue support to allow the industry to come back, to allow tourism and the visitor economy to come back and come back strongly, and it will do. And it'll provide the jobs, that'll provide well-paid jobs, and that will allow the benefit here in Liverpool for the whole of the city. So for the young people that are coming into the industry. And that's my big ask, because I know we talked then about real estate and the need for real estate to perhaps look at what the shiny new thing is. But actually, one of the things we need is actually recognize the strengths of the places that we're in at this moment in time and how we can actually transform those by supporting the business, the young entrepreneurs, the ideas that come forward. So it's about that continuing support. So if Rishi Sunak's listening, it's maintaining VAT at 5% for at least 2 years.
Okay, I'm going to move over to Joe. So the shiny new thing then.
Yeah, I mean, I think infrastructure is absolutely key. But the other thing is that we creating an experience. It's partly the real estate, but it's also the people within it that really create the experience. And we see all the headlines at the moment around a shortage of workers. That's really acute in our sectors, hospitality and leisure. I think from a private and a public point of view, I think coming together and trying to show people and offer people a long career within our industry and a successful career, and that can be had, and that there are rewards to be had from working in the tourism hospitality sectors, absolutely vital, because without that you can't deliver on the experience. So yeah, that's me.
People. Alan, finally over to you for that question about what's the ask.
Yeah, so I'll just highlight a great piece of work which is out today by the Federation of Small Businesses, which has got some really, really detailed thoughts on how to regenerate this sector. And I'm going to pop it in the chat because I do think people should take the time to read it. I will say, of course, that we don't spend enough money on promoting ourselves in the UK. My budget for this campaign is 7 million, which is very generous from the partners. New York's equivalent is 30 million. There's a point beyond which we're not competitive. It's curious to me that we are so free market in the way we approach this, whereas the rest of the world is happy to actually pick up a stick and fight. And I think this is probably an occasion where it's less about growing the demand and more about fighting for it. And right now we need a big stick.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm just going to finish up. So I think we have learned a lot today. So I've learned about how important it's going to be for all of our staycation locations to pass the Instagram test. And we've also learned about that importance of experience, the importance of people and investment and everything else that is going to be needed if we are going to be competitive and ensure that demand will not outstrip supply in the future. So I'm going to thank all my panelists very much now, because we've come to the end of what was a really interesting discussion. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Callum, who is going to let us know what's happening for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And also thanks to our panel for a great discussion this morning, kicking off day 5 of Real Estate Live UK. There is still more to come from Real Estate Live UK today. Right now, you can join us in Waltham Forest for a session hosted in partnership with Invest Waltham Forest. And then at 11 a.m, we will examine the role agritech will play in creating a more sustainable world in partnership with Hertfordshire Innovation Quarter, before our final lunchtime talk of the week with Dr. Wei Yang, President of the Royal Town Planning Institute. That is at 1 o'clock this afternoon. You can book onto these sessions by visiting the programme page on our website. That link again is www.realestatelive.co.uk. Thank you all once again for joining us this morning, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.